Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive that actually tells you to not give a feck?
Sounds intriguing, right?
We're tackling Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck,
It's a bit of a cult classic.
and for good reason. It really cuts through all that self-help
Need
noise.
to get to what matters.
And he does it in a way that's, well, let's say refreshingly blunt.
No sugarcoating here.
No, he kicks things off with an example that really surprised me.
Oh, yeah. Who's that?
Charles Bukowski, the writer.
I can see why that might be a curveball.
Bukowski, for much of his life, was what many would call a loser. Decades of rejections.
Yeah, that's rough.
Battling alcoholism, stuck in a dead-end post office job.
Not exactly the poster child for self-improvement.
Right. But here's the thing.
He turned it around.
Big time. At 50, he lands a book deal.
50. Better late than never, I guess.
And he writes his first novel in just 3 weeks.
Wow. Talk about making up for lost time.
It's almost like he succeeded by not trying too hard, you know?
There's something to that, isn't there?
And get this, his tombstone. It reads, "Don't try."
No way. Really?
It's not about being lazy. It's about this radical acceptance.
Of yourself, flaws and all.
Exactly. Bukowski didn't need anyone's permission to pursue his passion.
He just did it.
And the success followed. Makes you think, doesn't it?
About what?
All this pressure to be happy, to be perfect.
Oh, yeah. The hustle culture mentality.
Is it making us miserable?
It's a good question. Always chasing those positive vibes.
Could be making us afraid of the negative stuff.
And that's part of life too, right?
Totally. It's like we're all trapped in this highlight reel,
Social media is definitely not helping.
comparing ourselves to these curated, perfect lives.
No wonder we feel like we're not good enough.
Exactly. And Manson, he wants us to break free from that.
So what's the antidote?
He says true happiness comes from accepting those negative parts of life.
Not wallowing in them, but acknowledging them.
Right. They're natural. They're human.
And maybe even valuable in some ways.
This is kind of blowing my mind a little.
I know, right? It's a different way of thinking.
So it's okay to not be okay all the time.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the full spectrum.
That's a relief to hear, honestly.
And then there's this story Manson tells. It's wild.
Lay it on me.
It's about Hiru Oda,
Who's that?
a Japanese soldier who kept fighting World War II.
Wait, what? That the war ended?
In 1945. But Oda, he kept going for another 29 years.
29 years. Seriously?
He refused to believe Japan had surrendered.
Oh, wow. Where was he all that time?
Hiding in the Philippine jungle, surviving on his own,
And still fighting?
even got into skirmishes with locals.
Talk about dedication. But what's the point of the story?
Oda's story, it's not about encouraging us to hide in jungles.
Okay, good. Wasn't planning on it.
It's about suffering.
Oh, that's a bit heavier.
It's inevitable, right? We all go through it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But Oda, he chose his suffering for a cause he believed in.
Even though it was over.
It makes you ask, what are we willing to suffer for?
Are we choosing our struggles?
Or are they choosing us?
Deep stuff. I think most of us just try to avoid suffering altogether.
Maybe that's not the point.
So what is?
Choosing the right kind of suffering.
The kind that aligns with our values.
Exactly. And there's this other thing Manson challenges.
What's that?
This whole be accepting of everything idea.
Oh, yeah, be open to new experiences, all that.
He says it can lead to a pretty shallow life.
Really? How so?
If you're saying yes to everything, are you really valuing anything?
I never thought of it that way.
It's about choosing, not just what you want.
What you don't want.
That helps you define your values, what truly matters to you.
So saying no is important.
It can be. It's about being intentional with your energy.
With your time.
Choosing where you invest those precious fecks.
So sometimes it's okay to disappoint people.
If it means staying true to yourself.
It's a tough one, but I get it. So how do we actually do that?
Choose those values, I mean. How do we figure them out?
Yeah, and how do we stick to them?
Manson talks about when he first went out on his own.
Self-employed.
Yeah. He felt totally paralyzed. Fear, uncertainty.
I know that feeling.
Right. Like, where do I even begin?
You need to have it all figured out to start.
That's what he thought too. But he got some great advice.
From?
His old boss. He said, don't just sit there. Do something.
Simple.
But powerful.
Did it work?
It helped him get unstuck. He realized action comes first.
Before motivation.
Yeah. Sometimes you gotta just start moving.
Even if it's messy.
The answers, they tend to follow.
That's pretty empowering, actually.
It is. We don't need to wait for some perfect moment.
Just got to take that first step.
And speaking of steps, He uses this example of a musician.
Ooh.
Dave Mustaine got kicked out of Metallica.
Ouch.
Went on to form Megadeth, though.
They're huge. What's the point?
Mustaine, despite all his success, still saw himself as a failure.
Because of Metallica.
He measured himself against them, their even bigger success.
So he was using the wrong yardstick.
Totally. Classic comparison trap.
Even though, objectively, he was killing it.
It shows how the wrong metrics can mess us up.
So who did Manson contrast him with?
Pete Best, remember him?
Vaguely.
The Beatles' original drummer. Replaced right before they hit it big.
Oh yeah, that's got a sting.
But here's the thing. Best. He found happiness.
How?
He chose different metrics, didn't compare himself to the Beatles.
So it's about defining success on our own terms.
Exactly. What matters to us, not what society dictates.
This is making me think about values again. What are the good ones?
Well, Manson talks about these false gods we chase.
False gods, like what?
Things that seem important but ultimately don't bring lasting happiness.
Give me an example.
Like pleasure. We think seeking it will make us happy, right?
Seems logical.
But research shows that focusing on superficial pleasures,
Can backfire.
it can actually lead to more anxiety and even depression.
So we're trying to numb ourselves with pleasure.
Distract ourselves from the deeper stuff.
Wow. So chasing pleasure all the time is a recipe for unhappiness.
It can be. It's about finding that balance.
What about material success? Isn't that something to strive for?
Of course, we all need to meet our basic needs.
Or beyond that?
The link between happiness and all that stuff is pretty weak.
Yet we see so many people chasing it relentlessly.
Sacrificing their time, their relationships.
Their health, even?
It's like they're climbing the wrong ladder,
They get to the top, but it's not where they wanted to be.
Exactly. And then there's this other false god.
What's that?
The need to always be right.
But isn't that a good thing? To be knowledgeable?
Knowledge is important, sure. But we're all human, right?
We make mistakes.
We're biased. We misinterpret things.
So holding ourselves to this standard of always being right.
It sets us up for constant frustration.
It's like we're setting ourselves up for failure from the start.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we'll be wrong sometimes.
And that's okay.
It's how we learn. It's how we grow.
This makes me think of the whole good vibes only thing.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one these days.
Is Manson saying we shouldn't even try to be positive?
Not necessarily. It's more about not denying the negative emotions.
So suppressing them is bad.
It can be. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
It'll just pop up with more force.
Exactly. Those emotions, they're going to come out eventually.
So acknowledge them?
Accept them. And then choose how to respond.
This is starting to feel like taking responsibility.
For our own happiness.
Exactly.
It's about choosing values that actually make our lives better.
Instead of worse.
And this whole value thing, it gets even trickier.
Oh. How so?
Manson tells the story about a locker search back in high school.
A locker search?
Yeah. And a suspicious principal. It's a funny story, actually.
But there's a deeper meaning.
It highlights how unreliable our memories can be.
So we can't always trust our own minds.
They're shaped by our current beliefs and biases.
That's a bit unsettling. How do we even know what's true then?
It's about questioning those beliefs, the ones that cause us pain.
Okay, I see that.
He gives this example about his brother.
What happened?
He was frustrated because his brother never responded to him.
Texts. Emails.
Yeah. He took it personally, felt like his brother didn't care.
That's good.
But then he started digging deeper. He asked himself,
What?
why was closeness the metric he was using for their relationship?
Maybe it wasn't the only way to have a good relationship.
Exactly. Maybe respect and trust were more important.
So he shifted his perspective.
Then found peace with the situation.
That's pretty powerful, just by choosing a different way to measure it.
Our chosen metrics can really shape our whole experience. And Manson talks about his own dreams, too.
What were they?
He wanted to be a rock star, on stage, playing guitar.
Classic dream.
But he realized something. He didn't love the process.
The practicing. The rehearsals.
All of it. He was attached to the outcome, the image.
Not the actual work.
Exactly. It's like this character he talks about, Jimmy.
Jimmy.
He's full of big dreams, but a total slacker.
All talk, no action.
Pretty much. Lives off his family. Never follows through.
Sounds familiar.
Manson's point is, true fulfillment comes from the doing.
Aligning our actions with our values.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah.
Even when it's not glamorous.
So intentions aren't enough. We got to put in the work.
You got it.
But what if we struggle with that? What if we procrastinate?
He talks about this when he was self-employed, feeling overwhelmed, remembered that advice. Don't just sit there, do something.
So he just started working.
Even though he was afraid, he
Yeah.
figured it out along the way. The answers followed the action.
So we create our own motivation by taking action.
Often, yeah. It's a positive feedback loop.
This has given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a different way of approaching, well, everything.
I'm ready for more. What else does Manson have to say?
Well, let's talk about failure. He uses a great story about Picasso.
Picasso, the painter.
The one and only. And a napkin. It's a brilliant illustration of how mastery takes time. It's not about some magical talent.
It's about the work.
The practice, the consistency, over years, decades even.
So we need to embrace the whole journey.
The ups and downs, the wins and the losses.
But our culture tells us to avoid failure, right? Be perfect.
It's true. But that kind of thinking, it can be limiting.
Holds us back from taking risks.
From being creative.
True growth happens when we push ourselves.
When we're willing to experiment, to fail, to learn from those mistakes.
So failure isn't the opposite of success.
It's part of the path.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to, well, everything.
It's a shift in perspective, for sure. And this leads to another point Manson makes.
I'm all ears.
The dangers of goal obsession.
The goals are good, right? They help us achieve things.
They can be, but Manson argues that focusing too much on goals
Can actually limit our happiness.
in the long run, yeah.
How so?
It's like putting on blinders.
We miss out on other opportunities.
We become so fixated on that one specific goal.
We forget to enjoy the journey.
Exactly. He uses Picasso as an example again.
What about him?
He was prolific throughout his life, constantly experimenting.
Always trying new things.
If he'd been obsessed with one goal, say painting 1,000 pictures,
He might have stopped there.
and missed out on all the amazing art he created later on,
So instead of obsessing over specific goals,
we should focus on our values.
and let them guide us,
It's a more flexible approach, more creative.
and ultimately more fulfilling.
That's the idea.
This makes me think of how Manson started his blog. No real plan.
He was just following his curiosity.
His desire for freedom,
And he ended up creating something incredibly successful.
just by taking action consistently.
I'm doing something.
So sometimes the path unfolds as we go.
Trusting the process, even when we don't have all the answers.
This is reminding me of something else he talked about.
What's that?
His time playing professional poker. A game of luck, right?
You'd think so. But Manson learned something interesting.
What was that?
Luck plays a role in the short term, but
It's the choices we make that matter.
in the long run, yes.
So even in poker, we have some control.
Absolutely. He compares it to life, actually.
How so?
We all get dealt certain cards, some better than others.
But it's how we play those cards that matters.
Exactly. The choices we make, the risks we take.
So even if we get dealt a bad hand, we can still win.
It's about adapting, learning from mistakes, making the best of what we've got.
This is empowering stuff. But what about all the external factors?
Like what?
The media, societal pressures, all that information overload.
Yes. Manson talks about outrage porn.
Outrage porn.
It's this tendency for the media to sensationalize everything.
Creating a culture of outrage and blame
Exactly. It's designed to keep us distracted.
from the real issues.
And it fuels division, makes us angry at each other.
So it's a manipulation tactic.
We just say that. It's about being aware of what we consume.
Being critical of the narratives being pushed on us.
Choosing to focus our energy on things that actually matter.
So it's not about ignoring the problems.
It's about choosing our battles wisely, focusing on solutions.
This is all making a lot of sense. But I have to ask,
What's that?
how do we actually change our values? It sounds like a tall order.
It's not easy, that's for sure. Manson warns us about this.
About what?
As we start shifting our priorities, letting go of old values,
It's going to be uncomfortable.
we might feel uncertain, even like a failure.
But that's normal.
It's part of the process. It means we're growing.
So embrace the discomfort.
It's a sign that we're moving in the right direction.
Speaking of direction, how do we choose the right values?
He uses an interesting example. Teenagers with OCD.
OCD. That's a tough one.
It is. They have these debilitating compulsions, rituals.
And how does this relate to values?
They're taught to accept the imperfections of their desires.
To focus on values that are more aligned with their well-being?
And through therapy, they learn to manage their OCD,
So they find a way to live more fulfilling lives.
even in the face of these incredibly difficult challenges.
That's inspiring.
Yeah.
So it's possible for anyone.
To choose better values,
Yeah.
to create a better life.
Even when things are tough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have the power to choose.
To choose what we give a fuck about.
And that choice, it can make all the difference.
This is really resonating with me. But I'm curious,
About what?
how do we make those choices when we're feeling lost or afraid?
Manson says changing our values, it's simple, but not easy.
What does he mean by that?
It takes courage to face our fears, to be honest with ourselves.
And to step outside our comfort zones.
Exactly. It's about confronting those limiting beliefs
The ones that hold us back.
and choosing to embrace the unknown, the discomfort.
It's all part of growing.
He talks about this idea of commitment as a form of freedom.
Commitment is freedom. How does that work?
He used to travel the world, always chasing new experiences.
Sounds fun.
It was, for a while. But he realized something.
What was that?
All this chasing, it was actually preventing him from experiencing depth.
He was spreading himself too thin.
Exactly. He was afraid to commit, to miss out on something else.
So he decided to simplify.
He committed to one woman, one place, one career path.
Yeah.
And he found a level of fulfillment he'd never experienced before.
So true freedom comes from making choices, from commitment.
It can. It's about investing deeply in the things that matter most.
This makes me think about all the times I've said yes,
To things you didn't really want to do.
out of obligation or fear of missing out,
Sometimes saying yes to everything.
is a way of avoiding real choices.
Avoiding commitment and responsibility.
This is really eye-opening. It's like I'm seeing my life in a whole new light.
It can be a powerful shift in perspective.
This reminds me of the story Manson tells about going to Russia.
Oh, yeah. What was that about?
He encountered a very different communication style.
Compared to the West.
Totally. They were much more blunt, more direct.
He found it refreshing.
It challenged his assumptions about how people should communicate.
It helped him embrace a more authentic way of expressing himself.
So sometimes stepping outside our comfort zone,
Can help us see things in a new way.
challenge our own cultural conditioning,
And ultimately lead us back to ourselves.
to our own values. This brings us back to rejection, doesn't it?
Choosing what we don't want. Clarifying what truly matters.
Manson says we shouldn't try to be universally accepting.
That it can lead to a shallow life.
It's about having the courage to say no.
To set boundaries. To prioritize what's important to us.
So saying no
Is a way of saying yes to ourselves.
to our values.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our lives.
Yeah.
Making conscious choices.
I love that. But it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
Especially in relationships.
It can be tough. We don't want to hurt people's feelings.
But Manson says healthy love is about
Two people acknowledging their own problems.
not trying to fix each other.
Exactly. We shouldn't expect our partners to save us.
Or try to save them from themselves.
It's about taking responsibility for our own happiness.
While still supporting each other.
Finding that balance. He emphasizes clear boundaries.
Open communication.
True intimacy comes from respect and responsibility.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to relationships.
It can be a game changer. But, all this talk about values and choices,
What about it?
it brings up another big question. How do we deal with uncertainty?
When we don't have all the answers.
Right. Manson tells this fascinating story about a psychology experiment.
What was it about?
Participants had a button to press, and a light would flash randomly.
Sounds simple enough.
It is, but it highlights something profound about human nature.
What's that?
Our tendency to seek patterns, to find meaning, even when it's not there.
So we're wired to connect the dots, even when they're random.
Exactly. The participants, they were convinced.
That their button pressing was controlling the light.
They came up with elaborate theories to explain it.
Even though it was just random chance.
Exactly. It shows how easily we can fool ourselves.
We try to impose order on chaos.
Even when there is no order to be found, it's a reminder
To be aware of our biases.
to question our assumptions even when they feel certain.
So healthy skepticism is key.
Being open to new information, even if it challenges our beliefs.
Being willing to change our minds.
Exactly. But that brings up another point, doesn't it?
Which is,
If we can't always trust our perceptions, how can we be confident?
in our choices, our decisions. It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It can be. But Mansanta argues that uncertainty isn't something to fear.
We should embrace it.
It's where true growth happens, in those messy, ambiguous spaces.
I can see that, but it's still a bit scary, you know?
It's understandable. He shares this story about his own beliefs being challenged.
What happened?
He started questioning his own memories, his perceptions.
So even our own minds can deceive us.
It happens. It's a humbling realization, it means.
We don't have all the answers.
Our perspectives are always evolving.
So we need to be open to new information.
To different perspectives. To changing our minds.
This is a lot to take in. It's like everything I thought I knew.
It's being turned upside down.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's also exciting, in a way,
It is. It's about embracing the journey of learning and growth.
even when it's messy and uncertain.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine. It makes you think about what really matters, doesn't it?
It does. In a way, it kind of strips away all the BS.
So Manson is saying that by thinking about death, we can actually live better lives.
It sounds paradoxical, I know. But yeah, that's the idea. When we're aware of our own mortality, we start to see things differently.
We focus on what's truly important,
Right. Our relationships, our values, the impact we want to make.
instead of getting caught up in all the superficial stuff.
The things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
So it's about shifting our perspective
Right.
from fear of death to appreciation of life.
Exactly. It's about embracing the present moment, the beauty of being alive.
Because we never know how much time we have left.
Manson describes this incredible experience he had in South Africa.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
He was standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, feeling this vastness all around him.
This was beautiful.
It was. And he had this profound realization, his own mortality. And you know what? It wasn't scary.
It wasn't.
It was actually exhilarating. He felt this incredible sense of awe.
It's like he was seeing life through a new lens.
Exactly. All the worries, the insecurities, they just melted away.
He was able to just be present in that moment.
And appreciate the miracle of existence.
Wow, that's powerful.
Mm.
So how do we tap into that kind of awareness? Do we all need to go stand on cliffs in South Africa?
Well, maybe a change of scenery helps. But the key is to start asking ourselves that question Manson poses.
Which one's that?
What values are truly important in the face of your own mortality?
It's a heavy question, but an important one.
It is. It forces us to get real with ourselves. What do we want our lives to stand for? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
It's about living a life of purpose, of meaning.
And that's what the subtle art of not giving a feck is all about.
Choosing what matters, letting go of the rest, and living a life that's true to ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been a truly insightful deep dive. Thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's always a good time to explore these big ideas.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it valuable and maybe even a little bit life-changing.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep choosing your frecks wisely.
And remember, it's okay to not give a feck about the things that don't matter.
So you can give a feck about the things that do.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.